Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Are We on the Same Page? I'm your host, Dave Thomas Rocker, and this is my second video in my series on future inventions. Today I'm going to talk about 10 inventions that I'm predicting we'll get between 2050 and 2099. I already did one feature where I did the next 25 years. I called that the very near future, 2025 to 2049. This is my second, so this will be 2050 to 2099. So, um, anyway, before I do that, I want to give another plug for my book called My Spiritual Journey. This is available on Amazon, both in Kindle. I think the Kindle copy is $15 and paperback for $30. And I think you guys will enjoy this. It's a short book, it's about 100 pages. It's mostly one line quotes I came up with a couple of years ago on how to live a good life and also pertaining to spirituality and the kind of values that I think are important. And you might not agree with all of them, but at least I think it's food for thought. So check it out. Anyway, now I think I'll just start my video. Before I count down my top 10 inventions from 2020, 2050 to 2099, I thought I'd give you a little overview of the different eras of the future that I'm talking about. So like I said, I already did one of these. I did the top five inventions of what I call the very near future, which is 2025 this year until 2049. So that's basically the next 25 years. And I think most of us watching this channel will probably live through at least most of this year, probably all of it. Think I will. I'll probably barely make it to the end, hopefully. Uh, and then what I'm doing today is going to be what I call the near future. This is 2050 to 2099. There's pictures accompanying all of these things. So maybe I should talk about the pictures a little bit. So the very near future, this is supposed to be just some large city that doesn't look too much different from a lot of large cities that already exist, like Hong Kong or Manila, some very densely populated cities. But I think we can expect to see more of these in the next 25 years, more big cities and, more good and bad. I kind of talked about that already. And then for the near future, this picture is supposed to be kind of a city on Mars that I think we can expect to see, during the latter half of the 21st century. I don't think I'm going to live on Mars. I probably won't live long enough to live through this period anyway. But if I was younger, I don't think I would. Mars isn't for me. Maybe it's for some of you, but it's not for me. But a lot of important things are going to be going on right here on Earth, and I think I'm mostly going to be talking about that today. And then I talk about the distant future. That's the third picture, the one on the lower left. This is supposed to be the first half of the 22nd century. By then, I think a lot of us will be living in space on these things called space colonies. This is a torus-shaped space colony, and there's a lot of different designs for those. These are actually man-made structures in space that people will be living on. The big pioneer of this was Gerard O'Neill. He was an astrophysicist. I'm going to get to him later, but and then the last picture here, this is what I'm calling the very distant future. This is the second half of the 22nd century, and I don't want to go beyond that because I think beyond that, I just won't even be able to predict what's going to happen. It's going to be so far out, it might even be beyond the limits of my imagination, probably most of yours too. But this picture shown here is supposed to be some distant world, probably another star system. I'm imagining this might be a planet on the Alpha Centauri system. I mean, we've discovered all these exoplanets. We now know that planets are very common. Most stars do have planets, so Alpha Centauri probably has a few. Maybe it has one that looks something like this. Anyway, that's just kind of an overview of these eras. And so now I'm going to begin my countdown of what I think are going to be the top 10 inventions of the near future, 2050 to 2099. And some of these are a little bit of a stretch. I mean, the very near future was a lot easier for me to predict because we already have kind of prototypes of all of the inventions I talked about. I think it's pretty certain we are going to get all of them. Maybe not during the year I predicted, but at least a little bit afterwards. For the near future, some of these are a little bit of a long shot, I think, but they're all based on known science. I mean, that's one thing about the top 10 inventions I'm going to talk about today. They're not just pure sci-fi. They're not just pure imagination. None of these are fantasy. All these we could get, and we probably will get them at some point. Maybe not during the latter half of the 21st century, but eventually. And all this else is, assumes that we're not going to destroy the planet and destroy ourselves, because then we won't have any of this stuff. But let's hope that doesn't happen. But anyway, let's just begin. So number 10, weather control. Um, this is something that I think a lot of sci-fi authors have predicted for a while. I mean, it's a nice dream to be able to control the weather on our planet completely. We already have sort of some ways of controlling some of the weather. I mean, we can see clouds. That's a form of weather control. I think there's other forms of weather control as well. I'm not an expert on this, but I can foresee this happening. I mean, all we really need is we need a large enough system of satellites in space, maybe equipped with, I don't know what kind of equipment, but lasers or whatever kind of equipment can control the weather on Earth. And I think it would either be done locally, like each of these stations, each of these satellites uh, would control the weather in some region, or maybe they all have to work together. They probably all have to work together, because I think the Earth's weather is a global system. I think if you affect one part of it, it probably affects the whole thing. There's also something called the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flapping its wings could, in a short time later, maybe cause a hurricane halfway around the world. So, we'd have to know what we're doing with this, and I'm not 100% sure that this would work, but I wouldn't be surprised, and I think if this is possible, I think we will do it by the end of this century. So maybe some of the young people here will see this happen, and I think it has a lot of benefits. We won't have to worry about bad weather anymore. We'll have weather that's conducive to everyone and every living thing on this planet. You know, right now we got climate change, and we're affecting the weather in very unpredictable ways, probably in some disastrous ways. But this will be kind of the opposite, controlled weather. Um, Anyway, that's number 10. Number 9, synthetic food. This one isn't a long shot at all. I mean, we already have a lot of synthetic foods. Basically, I mean, even American cheese isn't a real cheese. It's a cheese food. It's a cheese product. And I used to live just across the street from the Kraft factory when I was living in Champaign, Illinois. It was pretty horrible. It's all chemicals, and I think I was lucky I didn't get sick from the chemicals, because they were all over the air near where I lived, and it wasn't very pleasant. It smelled like rotten cheese. But I mean, we could do good, and we're already starting to do this. I mean, I had an Impossible Burger at Burger King for the first time about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I couldn't believe that it wasn't made of real beef. It tasted just like beef to me. So we're already doing some of this. We're already making, veggie burgers, and we already have, I mean, the astronauts have been doing this for a long time. Well, most of the food they've been eating in space is artificial food. It's manufactured food or freeze dried food, and I think you guys all know that we use a lot of chemicals and additives and preservatives in food. We've been doing this for probably close to 100 years. But what I'm talking about here, I mean, maybe you might think this isn't a future invention, since we already have a lot of these synthetic foods. I'm talking about having a completely synthetic diet, basically. No more natural foods. No more killing animals for meat, and no more growing vegetables. I mean, maybe vegetables are okay. We might have to still grow vegetables. That's not a big problem. But we won't have to kill animals. We'll be able to be able to make vegetables taste just like meat, or seem just like meat, or maybe add chemicals to make it do that. And then that'll please a lot of people. That'll please all the animal rights activists. We won't have to kill any more animals for food. And it'll also improve our diet, and it'll improve the carbon footprint. There's a lot of other problems to eating animals besides maybe being humane, killing them. Especially beef. Red meat, beef and pork leaves a huge carbon footprint. I mean, it involves a lot of fertilizer, a lot of you know stuff that requires a lot of fossil fuels to produce. So the sooner we get off meat, the better for all of us. Plus, it's a lot healthier. Vegetables are a lot healthier. And I'm a little bit of a hypocrite here because I don't really like vegetables that much. I never did, especially the raw vegetables. And I still eat a lot of meat. I just like how it tastes. But if someday we have meat, we have artificial meat that tastes just like meat that's made from vegetables or maybe chemicals, then I'm all for it, And I'm predicting, this is the latter half of the 21st century I'm talking about, starting just, maybe 25 years from now. I think 30, 40 years from now, we may not be eating meat anymore. And I think that'll be great. I think that'll be great for society, for everybody. So I think this is a really good invention. Number 8, human teleportation. Now I'm getting to some pretty wild stuff here. I mean, some of the inventions I'm going to talk about here are going to sound like Star Trek. Actually, I have like 3 or 4 of these inventions in a row that are all featured on Star Trek various. So teleportation, I think any good Trekkies know that they use it on the Enterprise all the time. They're beaming, beam me up, Scotty. That's a famous line by Captain Kirk. They all get beamed. They go on these away missions. They don't, actually send a vehicle down to the planets they're visiting. They beam them down and then they beam them back up. They've been doing this since the original Star Trek series came out in the 1960s, and I think it was a pretty visionary concept. And at that time, there was no science to back this up. It was pure science fiction, pure speculation. But here's where things get really interesting. There's a thing in physics, there's a thing in quantum mechanics called EPR. It stands for the Einstein Podolsky Rosen paradox. It was actually thought to be a paradox. Einstein even thought this was a paradox. He thought it was an argument against quantum mechanics. He didn't like quantum mechanics. He never did. He thought there were these things called hidden variables, and it wasn't really a fundamental theory. And it turns out it is. And this was proven in the 1980s. I mean, first there was a guy named John Bell who came up with these inequalities. He said if there were these hidden variables that Einstein, had postulated, then all these inequalities should be satisfied. And then in the 1980s, there were some other experimental physicists. I think Alan Aspect was one of them. There were several others that performed these experiments that actually demonstrated that the Bell's inequalities were violated, which means that there are no hidden variables, which means that quantum mechanics is correct. And one of the weird predictions of quantum mechanics was this thing known as EPR. It's what Einstein had called spooky action at a distance. And it turns out, I'm not going to give all the details here, but it turns out that that exact phenomenon of spooky action at a distance is what allows for teleportation. It's already been done. I mean, first it was theorized, I think in the 1990s, and then actually there were some experimental physicists who teleported photons. And yeah, it's not people, but they teleported photons first, I think in the 90s, late 90s, and then now they're teleporting atoms. I mean, they've actually teleported matter already, and they've teleported at pretty long distances too. I think they've already teleported atoms, if I'm not mistaken, like 1,400 miles. That's almost like a quarter of the way around the world. I mean, so this is already real science. We're already doing this, and it's just a matter of scaling it up. I mean, sure, it's a big leap to go from atoms to people. And of course you have to worry about reconstructing the people completely accurately. You don't want to leave out an organ or something like that, or even part of the brain. So you got to make sure you get it right first, right? But I think this will be done. I think we will be able to teleport people by the end of the 21st century. I think we will have the beam me up, Scotty. That'll probably be possible before the end of this century. Maybe that's a little bit of bold prediction, but I'm predicting this will happen, and I think it'll be great. I don't think I'm ever gonna be beamed anywhere, but maybe some of you will. And then number 7. This is kind of related. This is kind of closely related to teleportation. This is the replicator. And this is another thing that's featured on Star Trek series. Here's Worf from Star Trek: The Next Generation beaming up a meal on the replicator on the Enterprise D. And they just mostly use it for food on that show, but you could use it for anything you want. And I mean, I guess the stuff you're replicating is sort of like beamed to you. But I mean, I guess let me just back up a little bit here. How would you do this? I mean, how would you physically do this? Well, it's a matter of converting energy into matter, right? I mean, replicating, you have to start with something. You can't get anything for free. There's literally no free lunch in the universe. Equals MC squared. You start with energy and then you can convert that to matter. And we've already done this. I mean, particle accelerators do this. You smash high energy particles together, they have a lot of kinetic energy, and then a lot of that kinetic energy gets converted into matter and gets converted into other particles. We've been doing this since the 1950s. So this is real science. We can convert energy into matter, but we've only done it in very crude ways so far. But we've made a lot of progress. I mean, there's a theoretical result. I don't think this has been done in practice yet, but there's another theory. I think I write it down here. I don't remember what it's called, but there's a theoretical result that says that you can actually convert light into matter. You can take a beam of light, or maybe some concentrated laser beams, and shoot them together and make matter out of that. And again, it's just a matter of scaling up. I think maybe with replicating, it's a little more complicated because you have to know exactly what you're replicating. You have to know the chemical composition of the stuff you're converting from energy. But I think we'll be able to do this too. I'll bet you that by the end of the 21st century, we'll have some replicators. So anyway, that's another technology I think we can look forward to in the near future. Number 6. This is another thing on Star Trek. I guess I went a little Star Trek crazy here. Well, I am a Trekkie, and I think Gene Roddenberry was a really amazing visionary, by the way. So maybe that's part of the reason I'm kind of subscribing to a lot of his visions here. But all the ones I'm featuring, they all involve known physics. This isn't just stuff I'm just dreaming up. I mean, this is stuff that has some basis in real science. So, matter-antimatter reactor. We know about antimatter. We've known about antimatter since 1932. It was Wolfgang Pauli, I think, or no, maybe Dirac. No, I think it was Dirac. I forget which one. Yeah, I think it was P.A.M. Dirac who hypothesized. Yeah, it was the Dirac equation. He theoretically proved that antimatter had to exist, which is kind of like the mirror image of ordinary matter. And then it was actually discovered, I think, shortly afterwards. Yeah, I think it was physically discovered in 1932. I think in 1932, the positron, which is the antimatter component, antimatter counterpart of the electron, was discovered. And the way to think about antimatter, for every particle in the universe, you can think of it as a mirror image. It's the antiparticle. And antiparticles, they have the same mass. They have pretty much the same of everything as the matter counterpart. The only difference is the charge is reversed. Also, I think the parity is reversed. And the other problem with antimatter is you don't want to come into contact with it, because matter and antimatter will annihilate each other. If you come into contact with antimatter, all of you, as well as all the antimatter you would come into contact with, would annihilate each other, and you just get a bunch of energy. All the matter, all the mass in you and the thing you come into contact with would turn into energy, and you wouldn't want that. So be careful. Don't shake the hands of an alien made of antimatter. But I mean, this is real science, and of course, there's problems with antimatter. We have actually made a lot of antimatter. I mean, we can make it in particle accelerators, but I mean, it's almost becoming an industry now. We can't make very much of it, But I think at CERN, the in Switzerland, the highest high energy accelerator facility in the world. That's where they discovered the Higgs boson. Another thing they're doing at CERN is they're making bulk antimatter. It's not really bulk yet, but they're making antiprotons, and I think they're even making anti-atoms. I don't know what kind of atoms, maybe hydrogen or helium. I'm not an expert on this, but there is bulk antimatter. It's hard to contain. I think you have to contain it in a magnetic bottle or something. Because you can't touch antimatter to matter, otherwise it'll get annihilated immediately. So you have to kind of confine it to a magnetic field, and I think that's what they do at CERN. And it's the most expensive substance in the world. I mean, I don't think there's very much of it, but it costs $2,700 trillion a gram, if you can imagine that. I don't think there is a gram of it, but if there were, that's how much it would cost. So it's also the most dangerous substance in the world for the reasons I mentioned. You don't want to come into contact with it. But anyway, if we're able to produce enough antimatter, maybe we can make an engine out of it, a matter-antimatter engine, which is what they use in Star Trek. And this would be literally the most efficient possible type of engine, even more than fusion. Fusion, you get about 1% mass conversion into energy, but with this you get 100%. So all the matter and antimatter in the engine that you're using all of it would get converted to energy. Nothing left over. And so if we're ever able to produce enough antimatter, we can enjoy these nice matter-antimatter reactors, which will probably drive spaceships, starships, and this is real. I mean, I think this is going to really happen. One thing you have to realize is that I don't think this would be a practical form of energy production, because you have to you have to make the antimatter to start with, and that takes a lot of energy. That would take just as much energy as you're going to get out when you annihilate it with matter. Maybe you get a little more energy because you're annihilating matter, not just the antimatter. So I don't know, but anyway, enough of that. Okay, then number 5. Now I'm getting a kind of a dark one here. I think all the inventions that I'm predicted so far, I don't see much negative to any of those that I just talked about. But this is a pretty negative one, I think. This is one I think we really need to be scared about. I'm pretty scared about this one. Designer babies. And the first person I know that predicted these things was he was an English author, Aldous Huxley, and he wrote this dystopian novel called Brave New World, which I read, I think, when I was a teenager. Disturbed me a little bit, but I also read 1984. 1984 was 100 times worse than Brave New World, in my opinion. Brave New World's pretty bad, though. I mean, Brave New World, you imagine that we were going to have, everybody was going to be a designer baby, and we're going to have all these different classes of designer babies in this world. And it's a pretty horrifying prospect, I think. Um, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe partly it's horrifying just because we're not used to thinking this way, but I think there's a lot more going on than that. The thing is, this is not too far off. That's another thing that's scary about this to me. One of the ways we've advanced tremendously, I'd say in just the last 20 years or so, is genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is a really cutting edge science right now. I'd say in the last 20 or 30 years, we've done so much with DNA. But we've done some good stuff. I don't have a problem with GMOs. Maybe some of you do. But a lot of our food, I think most of the produce that we have now is genetically modified. It's modified to be resistant to diseases. It's modified to grow faster. It's modified, just in so many ways that are beneficial to us. And I think it's helping to end world hunger. I don't know what the state is with world hunger right now, but I know it's not as bad as it was when I was a kid. I remember when I was about 10 years old, I used to hear that 2/3 of the world was starving. I don't think it's that much now, maybe half. I don't know. But I think in part it's not as bad because of GMOs, because we have more food now. We're able to feed people more effectively because of GMOs, and not just GMOs, but genetic diseases. I mean, there's a lot of genetic diseases that we've been able to cure because we isolate the gene that causes them, and we can modify the genes now and get rid of a lot of like sickle cell anemia. And we can spot the genes. We kind of know who we're mating with. We know what kind of genes they have. We know what the risks are of what kind of genetic diseases we could transfer to our children. So we've made amazing progress in those regards, but I think it's pretty obvious some of the pitfalls. I mean, these are the good aspects of genetic engineering, but then what about designer babies? And I'm not happy about this at all. I mean, maybe someday we will live in a world where we'll have designer babies and we're responsible enough about it that it'll be a benefit to society. But I don't think we're anywhere near that point right now, especially with what's going on politically. I mean, look at Trump and his cabinet, and our current Secretary of Health is this guy with a worm in his brain, RFK Jr. I'd hate to see him be in charge of genetic engineering right now. And if he collaborates with Elon Musk, they might start doing this shit. I hope not, because we're not responsible right now. I mean, it's just obvious what could go wrong with this. You put this in the hands of a madman, and they could make whatever kind of babies they want. They could create a master race of babies that'll wipe all of us out. I mean, I think they could even do this today if they wanted to. I hope nobody's working on this. I mean, one thing I do know is I know a couple things. First of all, I know that we have cloning already. I don't know how many of you guys remember about Dolly the sheep. That was the first cloned sheep. And I also heard that, I don't think, I think this is kind of speculative, but there were a couple of twins in China who supposedly were genetically modified. They were supposedly the first designer babies in the world. And, there was a big controversy about that. The Chinese government wasn't happy with it probably for good reasons. And I think they had them arrested, and I don't know what they did with the kids. But this is a scary thing because I mean, there's been a lot of movies about stuff like this. There was a movie called The Boys from Brazil. I don't know how many guys saw that movie. That was supposedly Dr. Mengele, when he was still alive. He was the doctor of death under the Nazi regime. Supposedly he survived after World War II, and he was figured out how to clone Hitler. And he made, I think, 94 copies of Hitler, and there was this Jewish spy who gets onto him and is able to stop him. But I mean, things like that could happen, and I think this is pretty damn scary. I don't think that we're responsible enough right now as a species. We haven't matured enough ethically to be worthy of designer babies. I don't think. Maybe in 100 or 200 years we will be, but I think we will have this technology. We already kind of do. So I think this is pretty inevitable. This is a scary thing to me because I think that the technology is already there, but the ethics aren't. And that's always a scary combination. So I think we have to be wary of this one. And then, I talked about the most extreme thing to be worried about, but another thing we have to worry about is, even if we don't have any madmen trying to deal with this technology, we have to worry about what's called a genetic aristocracy. I mean, another problem is that probably the people are going to be able to, I mean, maybe you might think, oh, it's okay if you design your own babies. But then what happens? The rich people are going to be probably going to be the people who are going to first to access this technology. So they'll be able to design smarter and stronger kids. So that's going to make more division between rich and poor. We're going to have, an aristocracy of more perfect human specimens that have more money. And I don't think that's a good thing either. That's kind of like building an Aryan race. So I'm very wary of this one. Number four. This is one that's really intriguing to me. Invisibility. I've thought about this a lot, and I think most people have actually. And it's not as far fetched as you might think. And the funny thing about invisibility, I think it's kind of like flight. I mean, ever since the beginning of humanity, I think we've all dreamt about flying. We do have flying machines now. And I think, since ancient times at least, we've thought about invisibility. I mean, there was ancient Greek myths. There was a guy named Perseus who had a helmet that made him invisible, and God's supposed to be invisible. I think a lot of the Greek gods could make themselves invisible. We kind of associate it with having a superpower, and I think there are some of the Marvel characters, like there's the Invisible Woman and the Fantastic Four, and so this is something that people have thought about for a really, really long time. But you might think it's just fantasy, pure fantasy, and I think for most of our history it has been. But here's where things get really interesting. It's real science now. I mean, we have this cloak. Look at this picture here. I think this was taken in 2003. There was actually, this was in Japan at the University of Tokyo. Some scientists made this invisibility cloak, and this kid here is wearing it, and you can see the people in back of him. I mean, he's not completely invisible, because you can still see a green glow, but you can see through him. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. This is like Harry Potter. Harry Potter had an invisibility cloak, and this may be coming a reality not too far from now. But I think we've got a long way to go before this is really practical. And then, I think this might be opening up a can of worms because, once we're able to be invisible, I mean, there's no telling what we might be able to do. And, obviously we don't want invisible armies. Hopefully we'll have a world government by then so that countries aren't trying to take over countries with invisible soldiers. And also criminals would have a field day with this. I mean, can you imagine what Al Capone's gang would have done if they could make themselves invisible? I mean, I don't want to think about stuff like that. So I don't think it's kind of like the thing with the designer babies. I don't think we're responsible enough for this technology yet. I mean, it's pretty fascinating that we're close to it, but I'm just kind of scared of what the outcome might be. If you want to experience invisibility in a way that's not harmful to anybody, go to the immersive virtual reality. We could make people look invisible in a program, but then they only look invisible to you. So I mean, you're the one in control, making things around you look invisible, and that's not going to be a threat to you. So maybe that's the only kind of invisibility we should try to get. But anyway, that's invisibility. I don't know which way that's gonna go. Number three, now I'm getting some kind of exciting stuff here. This is actually one I like. Artificial consciousness. I'd say this is a step above artificial intelligence, and I think we already have. I mean, everybody talks about AI now. AI is almost synonymous with computer technology, and I think computers are intelligent now. I mean, I think we might have even already passed the Turing test. Computer programs are so sophisticated now that we don't even know exactly what they're gonna do. We have these neural net programs. I mean, we have reliable voice recognition now. We have programs that can make images that look so reliable you can't even tell that they're not real. We have computer programs that can imitate just about any artist or any musician in the world. That's got a lot of artists and a lot of musicians up in arms because they're worried they're going to be put out of business. But that's just artificial intelligence. I mean, I don't think any classical computers. I already talked about this in my last video. This would have to be quantum computers that are artificially conscious. I don't think any classical computer, in other words, a computer that runs a deterministic algorithm, I don't think those can be conscious because I think consciousness requires, free will. And, free will goes against determinism. And I do believe in free will. And I think I said this in my last video, quantum computers, we do have another type of computer called quantum computers that use the laws of quantum mechanics, and they don't always return the same result. They don't always return the same output given the same input. Yeah, and I think that kind of uncertainty in the output, that kind of randomness, is actually an aspect of consciousness. So I think that quantum computers, once they're sophisticated enough, they will not only involve artificial intelligence, but they'll also involve artificial consciousness. And a lot of people are really scared about this. I'm not. I'm more scared about people. I mean, I might as well tell you off the bat. I'm not scared about a lot of the things that a lot of other people are scared about. I'm scared about ourselves. I think we're our own worst enemy. I mean, I think history has proven that. The biggest enemy of man is man. Look at all the wars we've fought throughout history. Look at all the physical violence, not just physical violence. Look how we've hurt each other throughout all of history. We've been our own worst enemy. I mean, yeah, we've had other enemies. We've had the enemies of the forces of nature. We've had enemies of predators. When we were cavemen, we had to worry about wild animals killing us. But I'd say ever since ancient times, pretty much, the worst enemy of man has been man. And so I'm not scared about computers or robots or artificial intelligence. Why do we just assume that they're going to be hostile to us? I mean, that's a very chauvinistic fear, because we should be more afraid of ourselves. I mean, why are we so afraid of computers? I'm not. I love computers. I use them all the time. I'm using one right now. We just kind of have to understand how they work. And so what if they're intelligent or even as smart as us or even smarter? We could learn a lot from them. They could teach us a lot. Maybe they'll want to help us, if we're nice to them. So I'm not worried about this. I'm not worried about computers taking us over or making enslaving us or any of that shit. I mean, there's been a lot of that in science fiction, and I just never liked that. And I'm not worried about any of that. I think we're the ones we have to worry about. We have to worry about concerning computers. We have to be very, very careful about how we're programming computers, how we treat computers. I think I'll just say one more thing about this before I get off of this. But I don't know how many guys saw the movies 2001 and 2010. You probably remember, if you saw 2001, the HAL, the computer on board the Discovery that goes crazy and ends up killing most of the crew. But then in 2010, they explained that it wasn't his fault. It was the fault of the people who programmed it. They gave it conflicting instructions. So, in other words, HAL was logical. HAL was following logical instructions, but the people who programmed it gave it conflicting instructions that didn't know how to handle that. That's why it went crazy. So it was the people's fault. It wasn't HAL's fault. And I kind of like how they resolved that. So we have to watch ourselves when we deal with computers. Anyway, enough preaching about that. But number two, now we're getting some stuff I really like here. I've been fascinated by this ever since I was a teenager. Space colonies. And the big proponent, I think the biggest proponent we've ever had of space colonies was this guy on the top right, Gerard O'Neill. He was an astrophysicist from Princeton University, and he came up with a detailed design of these a very specific design of a type of space colony. Now they're called O'Neill cylinders, and there's one shown on the bottom. There's actually a portion of one shown above next to him. This is the interior, I think. And then below, this is the exterior. So these things are long cylinders, and I'm not going to go into detail, describe them. I have another video on space colonies. I recommend you guys watch that one if you're more interested in this. But these would literally be cities in space, and they'd be man-made structures that people are living on. And it's kind of weird because I think for probably at least 100 years people have been dreaming of living in space, but I think most of that time we always imagine we'd be living on the surface of another planet or maybe a moon, you know. But why not build our own stuff in space? And there's a lot of advantages to this. I mean, we don't have to worry about gravity. It's a lot easier to do stuff in space because there's no gravity. If you want to get off a planet, you have to overcome its gravity. That's why it's so hard to launch, spaceships, launch satellites, because you have to overcome the Earth's gravity. That's why rockets are so huge. They have to carry the weight of all their fuel. But if you were doing it from outer space, you wouldn't have to worry about any of that. and you could control your environment. You could control the gravity. You have artificial gravity on these things due to centrifugal force. They spin around their axis, the central axis that creates a centrifugal force that simulates gravity. And you can make the gravity as strong or as weak as you want. And if these things were cylinder, that's why I like these designs, a cylindrical design. You could move in towards the central axis, and then your weight would decrease, and it would become zero. You'd be weightless once you get to the middle. So you could have these zero gravity sports in the middle. Pretty amazing. I wanted to live on one of these when I was a teenager. When I first read Gerard O'Neill's plan to build these things, he was very optimistic about it. He said we had all the technology in the 1970s already to build these things. He said it was just a matter of doing it. Just a matter of having people agree to build these things, and unfortunately we didn't. He said that we could have had the first of these as early as 1988, and now it's 2025 and we just still don't have any of them. So we didn't do what he thought we could have done. And maybe 1988 was a little bit hopeful, but I think at least we could have had the first of these by now. But I don't think we're going to get them until the latter half of this century. And I think we're going to get a Mars colony first, unfortunately. I'm not so enthusiastic about the Mars colonies. I'm a lot more enthusiastic about these things. But anyway, that's space colonies. But that's number two. So what's number one? That Number one is a benevolent world government. I mean, maybe you guys might think, like John Lennon said, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Um, you know, but I mean, I think that the fact that we still have countries is pretty ludicrous at this point. The only reason we have countries now is because everybody has their own agenda. Everybody wants to do things their way. It's really just a matter of power and corruption and greed. I mean, there's no good reasons to have different countries anymore. Why not just have everybody under one government that meets the needs of everybody on this planet. I don't even know why we don't have it. I mean, Einstein wanted this. We got the Cold War instead. Did get the United Nations right after World War II, but they don't really do shit. I mean, yeah, we get various countries meeting together to discuss certain issues, but we still got countries. We still got countries fighting each other. We still got wars. And I don't understand it at all. I mean, I think we're gonna need this. Maybe I sound like an idealist to you guys talking about a world government. And I know there's been a lot of caution about this. I mean, 1984 was all about a horrible world government. About as horrible as you can imagine. That was George Orwell, I guess, trying to warn us that we shouldn't rush into a world government because we're not ready for it. And maybe he did have some reasonable, reasons to be cautious about it. But, I mean, I think we just got to make it work. I think it could work. We just got to do what we need to do to make it work, and we have to grow up. I mean, I think the bottom line is that we have to grow up. We can't be fighting each other anymore. We can't be worried about getting rich off whatever kind of materials we have, whatever resources we want to hoard, and power hungry and want to have power over other parts of the world. And I mean, I see it getting worse, especially with Trump right now. I mean, Trump is like the antithesis of this right now. You know, I mean, you know, I don't know. I don't want to get too worked up about that, but I think we should have had a world government by now, and I think we need one. I mean, I don't want to sound too alarmist about this, but I think we're going to need one if we're going to survive. And I think if we do survive, we'll have one. And I think the world will just be so much better off with it. And I think we can make it work. I'll let you guys work out the details of how it could work. I mean, I can give you a few details. We could, I mean, we have this wonderful database called the internet. We could we could use that data for good. We could have fair elections. We could make sure that everybody make sure there's no fraud on the internet, that all the information we're getting is reliable, and we could have people vote on the internet instead of going to the voting booths, and we could have some fact checking mechanisms that check that all the voting is being done responsibly. We can educate people a lot better. We can educate on the internet now. We can make sure that everybody's getting reliable information and using it reliably. There's a lot we could do. And I think the other thing we're going to have to do to make this work is I think a lot more people are going to have to be actively involved in this world government. It can't just be a passive thing where we're all just sitting back and being the silent majority on letting this world government do its thing, because that's what we've done already and it hasn't worked. Remember what JFK said: "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask you for you can do for your country." I think the same is going to hold for this world government. Everybody's going to have to participate in one way or another. That's the only way it's going to work. Maybe it'll have to be a pantocracy, but I think we're going to need this anyway. So that's my top 10, my list of what I can think are going to be the top 10 future inventions of the latter half of the 21st century. Thank you for watching. Keep thinking, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.